Hey guys, VaulSC here. Hope that you're having a great week. So just very recently, Hellous from Corvus Belli put out this little change log where Army has been updated with a few little tweaks to the points cost of the guided missile bots. That's the missile launcher bot that can shoot that guided missile onto a targeted enemy model. And look, what they're doing here is not so much changing the balance of the bots. What they're doing is they're just bringing them in line so that they are the same points as their counterparts in other factions, etc., etc., etc. But it's left everybody wondering, first of all, why make these tweaks to these specific units when there are a lot of other things in the game that, you know, really could do with some attention and hasn't really got much attention for a long time. And secondly, reducing the points cost of a unit that already sees a lot of play by a couple of points directly is, you know, a buff to some factions that really just don't need it. So that's generally what we're going to be talking about in this video. I'm just going to be going through some other units in the game which I think need a points change. I'm going to talk about some units that need a points increase because they're too strong, and I'm going to talk about some units that need a points decrease because they are too weak. So we'll look at some examples, and the main premise and point of this video is that Corvus Belli have the capability to tweak the points cost of units here and there, but they choose not to for the ones that really matter, and that can be frustrating for us. So let's just have a talk about it. Let's just get the discussion going. Before we dive into the stats, I'd really encourage you guys to check out Table Game Fun Times. It's an amazing drama sitcom type thing for Infinity with some really cool stop motion animation action. So if you like the look of the cinematic stuff that you're seeing on screen right now, please check out the video in the link in the description here. I'd just recommend, if you haven't seen it before, just start with the most recent episode because that's the best one. And then if it's your kind of thing, great. Watch it from the beginning. But if it's not your kind of thing, wouldn't worry about the other videos. But if you play Infinity, I'm sure that you'll get some enjoyment out of it. Cool, so let's just have a look at the post itself. So here we are. Let me just grab my video capture and hello us saying Vertigo Zones, that's the Nomad one, has come down by a point to 16. So this is in the most significant Nomad lists. With Jazz and Billy out there and the Morans, you can get Spotlight off very easily. And what this is doing really is just decreasing the points cost of the most powerful list in N4 at the moment. And it's just taking it down by 1 point, which seems silly to me. So we also have some changes to the other bots. Note that, for example, this is the left bot's come down a couple of points, and the one that is capable of being in a link team has come down to 17 points to make up that difference. There are some other little changes here. People are scratching their heads wondering why there is a ability to put Frontovix and a Ratning Harris. We're not going to focus on this sort of stuff in the video, but I say this often, and I will repeat myself yet again. The one thing that we sort of want from Corvus Belli that so many people agree on, like we don't necessarily agree on rules changes, but one thing that everyone really agrees with is that we love Corvus Belli to explain the rules changes a little bit better and provide some examples and just put a little bit of commentary about, like, why do you think this change is necessary and why have you not touched a lot of other stuff that does need changes. It'd just be so helpful to see that from Hellous and the team, just making a comment about, okay, we needed to address this because of X, Y, and Z, and just understand their reasoning, because we look at this and we're like, you know, what are you doing? Like, it's just baffling. Cool, but we have fixed some points for these bots here, and that's going to be the subject of the discussion from here on out. So what I thought I'd do to entertain you guys is to go through one by one 8 different units that I think need their points changed for Infinity N4. I'm going to talk about 4 units that need their points decreased and 4 that need their points increased. All right. Decreases and increases. So let me just grab my cam here, and we are going to I clicked on this, didn't I? Here we are. All right, let's go to the first one over here, and I'm going to chat about the Unknown Ranger. So I've chosen this one because there's just this consensus of people who play Infinity that this particular unit, because it is so undercosted, means that so many other units in Ariadne and Cosmoflot just aren't used. They just aren't relevant. You look at something like the Cosmo Soldat, which is an interesting unit. you just don't take him. You can't really take him because the Unknown Ranger goes into your list first for that role, and you don't really need anything else beyond him. You spend the other points on the bear pods and the cheap cheerleaders and Uxie McNeil and stuff like that. So if this guy was increased in points a little bit, you can get to the point where it's suddenly like, well, maybe I should take him this game and not other games. Maybe I can take him in this list but not other lists. But because he is a specialist and a really good gunfighter, and he's tough and he's amazing in close combat, and he's got excellent equipment and has access to armor piercing, and he goes in your link teams, it's just ridiculous that he costs 47 points. So any points increase here would be okay. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to just like double his points cost or something. If you go through and you change his points from 47 to 48, everybody's going, oh, okay, well, it's not enough of an increase, but it makes sense. Like, if you are willing to change the cost of Jazz and Billy or a TR bot, or sorry, not a TR bot, a guided missile bot by 1 point, surely they have the capability in their minds to come along and change a unit like this by 1 point. Realistically, I mean, you talk about increasing it by 3 points, 6 points, something more like that would steer it in the right direction. I don't know the exact amount, but I would say that an increase is definitely in order. And from what I've heard from the community, that really is the consensus. The other way to balance units and address them is to change the abilities and so forth. And I don't mind seeing that as well. And we'll talk about that a bit during the video. Just removing the specialist operative and the tactical awareness would do a lot to rebalance this unit. You'd still take them a lot of the time, but without specialist operative and tactical awareness, you'd sometimes consider other units for the points, and that's where you want the game to be at. You want your players to enjoy the process of list building, whereas when I think about Ariadne, I'm just completely bored to death with the prospect of coming up with a competitive vanilla Ariadne list, because it's been solved. Like, everybody else has figured out what list to take, so it's just not fun or interesting. All right, let's go to another one. So this is the Guija, everybody's favorite Yujing tag, and they have improved this over time. Like, it was much worse in N3. They made it better in N4. It does have super jump now. It's a little bit better in close combat now. But overall, it is just too expensive. Even though it's a tag, and even though it has tactical awareness, and with the N4 rules, tags are just generally better, people don't use the Guija competitively. And when meme list players have been trying to get him to work, everybody ends up failing. And it really is just because he's such a commitment, he's such a cost, you can't support him with enough stuff in your army list. And you go look at something like the Chernobog, the Ariadne tag, which is actually very similar, but a lot less expensive. It's kind of crazy. Even like the Raicho from Combined Army, I sometimes would take that tag, even though I don't really like the Guija. And it's just because the Raicho's just got a couple of extra things that the Guija doesn't. But overall, this is like the heavy infantry faction. You've got Haktao, you've got the Shang-Chi, you've got some other units you put in that role, and you rely on them. You don't really rely on the Guija. If this unit was to come down a few points, that would be a big swing in the right direction. I don't know what's the lowest you could make it, but even if it was like 72 points, it would sort of be worth it at that point, but you'd still struggle building really good lists around it. And it's not like throwing a 72-point Guija into the meta would suddenly make the Guija lists win all of the time. It would be very, very strong, but the point I'm making is that reducing it by 1 point is not enough. Reducing it by 10 points is like, I'm not really sure. So what you could do is just make a really safe move where you reduce it by, 3 points, and see how the meta plays out, and then address it with another points change later on. The Moran, so these are really despised units in the game. And it's for a few reasons. Number one, they're not fun to play against. It's a very passive unit. He just sits there, and because of that repeater, you're not having to spend an order to put the repeater down. And even if you're taking first turn against the Nomad player, you've got that 16-inch bubble, and you've got two of these big, massive zones where you can't walk through it unless you have stealth. Otherwise you get hit by spotlight, or if you're a heavy infantry or something that's hackable, even worse, they're just going to oblivion you or carbonite you. So the Moran is just kind of like an unfun unit to play, and because N4 had made hacking so much more effective, and with Spotlight being an ARO thing you can do now, and stacking with the guided missile bots, which just got cheaper, by the way. The Moran is the first infiltrating specialist you put into your Nomad list, and often the last. You don't consider bandits, you don't consider specters, you don't take these other really cool and interesting infiltrating specialists, you just take the Morans. Sometimes you take a zero because they're so cheap, but only once you've got the Morans in there, and they're in every Corregidor list as well. Increasing their points would make sense. When you've got a unit that can infiltrate, has mimetism, has, the mines, is a specialist, and with the repeater, I mean, it shouldn't be costing 17 points. And you've got a crazy koala on top of there. I think this unit could quite comfortably be 27 points for the boarding shotgun profile, and you'd still look at taking it sometimes. And sometimes is the key word there, right? You don't really want to be having a unit that never appears and sees no play, and you don't want it seeing like every single list. So between 17 and 27 is fine. If they came out and they said, right, Moran's, the two repeater profiles are going up by 1 point, everybody would be like, oh, wow, that's so sensible. That just makes so much sense. Like, these guys are going the right direction. Change it by 2 or 3 points, it's like, oh, finally they understand the game. And then if you increase it by 5, 6, 7 points, there are going to be some people out there going, it's too much of a nerf, Nomads didn't deserve that. So, again, you could just be on the safe side if you want to. It's not that hard. A few points really changes this. If it were up to me, by the way I would fix Morans is that I would keep the profile here with the boarding shotgun, make that the only profile you can have, make it 27 points, but then I'd have another profile which keeps it at 17 points but nerfs something else, like you make it for deployment +4 rather than infiltration, keep it at say 17 or so points. Then you have another version with 17 points that does infiltrate, but it doesn't have a repeater, but it still keeps everything else. And that way, you can almost choose, as the player, you can choose which nerf you're going to take. So if you think that paying extra points is worth it for all that stuff, great. If you don't think that, but you still want that unit in the midfield, but you don't care about the repeater, then great, you've got a really cheap option for that. Or if you really want to keep everything, but just want to be able to afford it, then you've just nerfed that sort of ability for it to sort of oppressively control the midfield with that hacking area, right? So that's my approach to it. Over here, we've got Rodox, and although I've used Rodox as the example, there are so many heavy infantry units in the game which are too expensive, and you can go through them. I mean, Govards from Hakislam, Wildcats from Nomads, Druze, there's just so many units who are sort of in that sort of range where they're more expensive than the line infantry and don't do much more than the line infantry. And my theory is that if you made these guys just a few points more expensive than a line trooper, people would look at that and go, well, why would you ever take the line troopers? Because these guys have clearly got the better gear. Well, the reasoning is that you take the line troopers because they're as cheap as possible, and sometimes you put a unit into your army list because of link teams, because of being a cheerleader, because of generating orders, and you just want to take the absolute cheapest one you can. If I click on Vanguards, the 14-point combi rifle guy here obviously isn't as good as a Rodoc, but the thing is, a Rodoc costs like 20-odd points. So if we took, just say, the boarding shotgun guy and made him 16 points instead of 23, does that mean people would be putting like a 16-point Rodoc in all of their lists? No, absolutely not. You'd have some Morat lists who would take one or two of them sometimes, but generally when you're putting stuff into your list, you're either taking something as cheap as possible because you're not going to fight with it, or something that is actually really beefy and actually can crush in face-to-face rolls, which the Rodoc still doesn't really do. 16 points, again, it might sound like an exaggeration, but if you wanted to be safe with this, I'm just going to keep saying this, you reduce every single profile here by 2 or 3 points and you're safe. You're not going to break the game. People might start using those wonderful Rodoc units again, and you're fine. Just choose a point between line infantry and where they're at now, and you can follow that formula for Druze and for Govards and for Wildcats and so many other things in the game. Again, I mean, reducing them by 1, 2, or 3 points, not going to break the game, makes so much sense, and you get to a point where list building starts to become a little bit more interesting again with N4, which it currently isn't, by the way. I mean, building lists is not that much fun unless you're a bit newer, less experienced, and you haven't really tried all the options. The Zamira Nazarova and Zulika Nazarova are the biker girls, the Nazarova twins. And for this entry here, I'm going to actually talk about both of them. So we've got Zamira at 11 points. They gave her Berserk, which she didn't need. She's got an EM CCW, the strongest close combat weapon in the game because it causes, 2 armor saves, which cause wounds, and it isolates you as well. It's an absolutely ridiculous weapon, and she can actually Berserk 14 inches and just bash you. So I just don't see why that should cost 11 points. Realistically, they should just take away Berserk and maybe the Dogged or just some other thing that makes her powerful, and then maybe, okay, 11 points doesn't matter as much, but with that kind of setup, it's just too cheap for what it does. And Zulika's always been a problem here. She just has so many little abilities she can provide for that 12 points that she does. I find it really weird that she's got +1 burst to close combat attack, so that, again, allows her to absolutely crush with the explosive close combat weapon. Light flamethrower +1 burst, with a breaker pistol +2 burst. It just seems a little bit overkill for such an absolutely ridiculously cheap unit. Really should go up by 1 or 2 points if you're willing to change the guided missile bots. I'm not really sure why they're not looking at this stuff as well. But while we're at it, I mean, give Hakislam some other buffs elsewhere. Make the Govads cheaper, make Nafatuns cheaper, make other things that people don't really use cheaper, and you're fine. The Asuras, a long-maligned unit, they're iconic, really. This is such an iconic Aleph unit, and my view is that anything that's like a signature unit in the faction, something which you automatically think of when you think of the faction, that really should be the overpowered unit that you go to. It's great that Aleph has posthumans as a really strong unit because they're so unique. You wouldn't really want them to be the unit that's always on the shelf. But the Asura, unfortunately, it's the opposite. She's just too expensive for what she does. MSV3 doesn't really give you enough of an advantage in the game, and her weapons are quite short-ranged. She starts in your deployment zone, and although she's very tough, she's very vulnerable to hacking. She can be a hacker herself, but if it's the enemy's active turn and they pump a repeater next to her and just hit her with the Trinity again and again, she'll die if she's the hacker, and you lose 65 points very quickly. And if she's not the hacker, then she's, again, you run into the Morans, which we just talked about. She is just in a world of trouble, doesn't have stealth. If she's in a big firefight against a tag or something like that, or like a missile launcher or a link team, again, it's just kind of sad. So she's got a lot of liabilities and not a lot of potential to get work done. MSV3 looks very good on paper, but your opponent can just stay in total cover, right? Rather than just facing you and letting you shoot them after you discover them. So the Asura, again, I think that it could come down on points. It's not going to be an overpowered unit if you reduce it by 1, 2, or 3 points. You should absolutely be fine. I think this unit could come down by 10 points, and sometimes you wouldn't take it, sometimes you would, and that's just really crucial. And at minus 10 points, it becomes the kind of unit where you like putting it in your lists because it feels cost effective, and you get to see that wonderful model used a lot more. And Aleph just becomes a bit more of an interesting faction because you've got some lists which are built around the Asura and some that aren't. Because again, I mean, at 57 points for that Lieutenant +1 Auto Spitfire, which I think is the best profile, you're still spending quite a lot, and you've still got to back it up with everything else. You've got net rods, which cost more now. It's not going to be like an automatic win by taking that profile. Over here, the Libertos is not a Nomad unit. It's basically for every vanilla faction except, I think, Pano can't take it. This unit got heavily nerfed between N3 and N4. It doesn't have a couple of things that it had before, but unfortunately, it is in pretty much every vanilla list that can take it. Nomads, even though they have access to so many other busted things, still take it. Ariadna, they've got access to so many other completely ridiculous things, they still take it. Aleph players always take it, absolutely always. Hakislam have got similar units to this. They've got a lot of irregular units. You still see them taking the Libertos sometimes. It's silly. It's just silly. For 8 points, you've got a guy who really just does so much damage in the midfield. He's expendable, and it's hard to stop him from getting that value because of the way that shotguns work and the way that he dodges so effectively. Can't believe he has Dogged in there as well. This unit probably should cost 14, 15, 16 points kind of thing, making it a unit that you see more rarely. What you really want is people collecting a vanilla faction army and making it really thematic and painting it up in a nice sort of thematic color scheme, and not have it sort of just clogged up by a lot of mercenaries which don't even relate to that faction in terms of the theme. What Infinity's sort of become now is a lot of sort of mix and match sort of units and so forth, which most people don't really like that much. This should be more of a corner case unit, something which you see more often in Deshat, and not like the first unit that you put into every vanilla list. Lastly, I thought I'd bring you an O12 unit. This is probably the weakest example, but I think it still is a legit example. The Bronze, he's a little bit too expensive for the same reason that the Asura is. He's a little bit too plain. The total immunity makes him kind of unique for O12 and kind of interesting. I quite like the ability on that because it's just not too egregious. It's not like bare powder levels are broken. But you can't really be building a list around the Bronze because he just doesn't bring enough for those points. You'd really want to be taking the Red Fury guy, but even then he's a bit slow, starts in deployment zone. It's kind of hard really to get that value out of him. If you dropped his points by 3, 4, 5, or 6, that sort of range, he sort of gets to the territory where he's never going to be broken. Like, he's not going to win tournaments for you single-handedly. But list building suddenly becomes a bit more interesting because you're thinking, well, do I take the Zeta, or do I take the Omega, or do I take a Bronze? And I try and build around that because of total immunity. And that's where, you start having a bit more of an interesting game in terms of list building. Well, I'm just going to end it there, guys. That was my quick review of just a few units in the game that could use their points changed. If Corvus Belli really is going to be doing more of these points value tweaks, this can go up a point, down a point. Here are some examples, guys. Have a think about it, and do check out Table Game Fun Times, and I'll see you in the next video.